Hello and welcome to Thoughts in the Green Room with your host, Geoff Mays. This week's topic, anger. Now, I want to talk about anger because it has applications both for actors as well as applications for quote-unquote the real world and the level of communication that we hold and what it's doing to us. So, in order to discuss anger fully, from those two perspectives, I think it's very important that I start off with a couple examples about anger and its application, and I'll go from there. So the first thing that I want to take a look at is taking you back to your childhood. You know, a scene where you think about a kid who is told by their parents that they will receive a treat if they're a good kid all day. So this kid, thinking that they're going to get this great treat, they decide that they're getting a cookie. This is what's in their mind. So they spend all day long doing everything they can to be the best kid possible. Make sure the room is clean. They do anything the mom or dad says. They are like the perfect child for almost 24 hours. And it's coming around to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and kid's thinking, I've been good all day. It's about time to get my treat. So they head out into the living room, the kitchen space, and they say to mom or dad or both, they say, can I get a cookie? And mom or dad says, no, you can't. Now the first thing that goes through this kid's body and mind emotionally is confusion. They're like, wait a second, I was told that I was going to get a treat if I was good, and I've been good all day long, so now I get a treat, and a treat equals a cookie. And this kid is processing a lot of confusion. They're maybe feeling lost because they're not getting their cookie. They've just been told no. Feeling a little bit overwhelmed. And the idea of processing this confusion, this sense of loss is overwhelming. They don't know how to do it. And it's hard to look at it and hard to manage it because they're just so stunned and confused all at once. And as a result of not getting their cookie, they lash out. They become angry. They throw a tantrum and they start storming around the house, and mom and dad's attempts to calm the child and bring the child back to a sense of normalcy fail utterly because the kid is so flabbergasted, having done such a great job at being a good kid all day, that they're not getting a treat. And the result, of course, is mom and dad have to send the kid to the room finally. The kid gets grounded, and finally they find out that because they've been such a bad kid during this tantrum time frame, that they lose out on their treat. Their treat being that they were going to be taken to their favorite restaurant for dinner that night. And the kid is absolutely crushed. I want to move you forward a little bit in time to when you're a teenager, because I think everybody can relate to this. Example number 2, everybody had that teenager, that best friend, that amazing friend that they thought would make a even better friend if it was a romantic thing, those first forays into the romantic world. And you tell your friends, I kind of like so-and-so, and I'm all excited about it, and you spend weeks and months planning that perfect moment when you're going to finally ask out this person who you think is the love of your life, and there you are having a study date that you're hoping to turn into a romantic date, and you lean in with the magic words that you've rehearsed a zillion times in front of the mirror, and your friend says, no, not a chance, and they reject you. And in that immediate moment, the first thing that runs through you is that feeling of rejection, and then maybe a sense of loss, a sense of vulnerability, and hurt, another primary thing. And all of these emotions are valid, of course, but they're really, really hard to process in that moment. You're hurting so much. You're feeling rejected. You're feeling vulnerable. You just put yourself out there to get nothing from this. And now, in response to all of this overwhelming emotion, you lash out. You say some horribly vulgar things to this person. You call them nasty names. You do everything that's completely out of character with you. And of course, this leads to a giant fight. The fight gets worse and worse and worse, and finally the friend gets up and says a whole bunch of nasty things to you, and off they go. And the end result is that the friend never speaks to you again. They can't believe you behaved so badly and disrespected them so much, and you lose the friendship. What you thought was going to be something beautiful is gone entirely. The third example takes us forward a little bit further in life once again into the corporate world, or any world really in terms of a job. And you've got a presentation a make or break presentation. This is the thing that's going to really make you shine in the boss's eyes. And a key component of that presentation, of course, had to come from another department. Your colleague in the other department has guaranteed that you will have it the morning of the presentation, a good 4 hours beforehand. They've had delays on their end for various reasons, so 4 hours before you've got the presentation, you'll have the final printed materials. So you head over to the desk that morning, day of the presentation, and you sidle up to the colleague and you say, "Hey, where's the report?" And they say, "It's not done. We need an extension. There's no way we can get this done." And you first off experience fear. You are afraid of how you are going to look to the boss. You are afraid of how you're going to look in front of your other colleagues. You're fearful that maybe you'll lose your job because this was such a big and important presentation. And you're freaking out inside. You're also really super nervous about what to do. Like, where do I go with this? You got fear and nerves overriding you. And trying to process that is overwhelming. It's too much to handle. And as a result of it being too much to handle, you turn to the colleague and you lash out. You tear them a new one. You rip into them. You threaten them and throw stuff at them verbally that is completely inappropriate in the workplace because you are just so overwhelmed. Now, let's not even talk about what happens at the presentation that afternoon. It obviously goes awry because you don't have the right materials, you're not prepared, and you look pretty bad. But more importantly, that colleague that you've had for several years is absolutely appalled. They can't understand the level at which you went because they just can't. They're like, wow, that anger was uncalled for. And they go and they formally place a complaint against you to the HR department. And now not only do you look bad in front of all your bosses and all the important bigwigs of the company, and you may have lost your shot for promotion, but you're also now skating on thin ice because you have a formal complaint about you in HR. All bad things. But most importantly to me, that colleague of 10, 15 years, maybe only 5 years, who knows, that colleague who you have a cordial relationship, it's no longer cordial. It's very stressed and tenuous, and for as long as the two of you continue to work there, you'll always have friction and difficulty communicating when it comes to the workplace. And that relationship is now junked. So with those three examples, I've captured a huge breadth of moments when people get angry, and they can be jigged and jagged to fit just about any scenario, but those are good general categories for anger at different stages in life, and they apply across life in general. And I want to take a look first at this from the actor's perspective. Anger is an explosive, violent emotion, and it looks really, really powerful on stage or screen, and you look really cool frothing at the mouth and throwing the chair across the stage or punching your fist through the wall. And for all of 3 to 4 minutes, the audience is like, whoa, wow, look how good they are, they're freaking out. But you've got a whole scene in front of you. 2 pages maybe, page and a half, 3 pages, who knows. You've got a whole scene. And at the very top of it, you lose your cool and you are super angry because many young actors do it. It's a really cool place to go to. I'm not disputing that. But the challenge here is that although it's a cool place to go to, if you go to that place first, you've got nowhere else to go. And anger, being so loud and violent and explosive, can only be handled for so long by the audience. So after about 3 or 4 minutes, the audience starts to shut down. And they're no longer engaged with you, but they're pulling away from you because they don't want to be present with all of that rage and all that anger and angst. They don't want to sit in that for too long, and now you've lost the audience. Now, here's the interesting thing. For an actor, anger, let me rephrase that, often for young actors, sometimes for other actors, but often for young actors, anger is a primary place to go. When we take a look at all of our examples, anger is always the secondary emotion that follows the primary. When I think about the kid, he's lost and confused feeling. When we're thinking about the teenager, that teenager feels hurt and rejected. And we think about the adult, they had fear and nerves. And as a result of being incapable of managing those fears, those nerves, and all those other emotions I just said, people lash out. Now, sometimes it's conscious, Sometimes it isn't conscious, but when they lash out, it's an attempt to bring the other person into the same space that they are, which is that loss and that hurt and that confusion all at once. And, well, misery loves company. If you can't deal with it by yourself, make somebody else feel just as bad. So actors, like in real life, when people jump to the rage, actors often make rage the first choice. But as I just pointed out, it is actually in real life the secondary emotion. The primary emotions were for the child, the loss and the confusion. For the teenager, the hurt and rejection. For the adult, the fear and the nerves were the primary emotions. And when it comes to acting, playing primary emotions first is much, much more engaging for an audience. Think about being that kid and being told no to the cookie and playing sly and putting on fake pouty eyes and seeing how good the puppy dog face looks and what it may or may not get you. And when that doesn't work, moving to a different tactic of being coy and saying you didn't really want a cookie and brushing it off and trying to be cool so your parents will give it to you because you really didn't want it, or anything else that you choose to play. But sitting with those primary emotions. Now, agreeably with a child, I gotta say this, agreeably with a child, they're not going to have the language to play there. But if you're thinking about from an acting perspective, we come back to the choices. Those primary emotions were confusion. So playing that confusion first. I don't get why I'm not getting a treat. What's going on? Whoa, and all of that. And then the feeling of loss. Maybe it brings you to tears, who knows? And then trying to be coy to bring it back and get the treat anyway. And when all of that doesn't work and your parents still saying no, you finally explode for the last moments of the scene. And the audience is fully with you and bought in because they watched you go through the process to get to the rage and the anger. And they go, wow, justified. And they really buy in. We jump forward to the scene with the teenager and the teenager gets rejected. And again, the primary emotion there was first the feeling of rejection. Second, the feeling of loss and hurt, vulnerability all come into there. For the young actor or the inexperienced actor who goes to anger, we know the outcome. But what happens if you play the primary first? If you play the hurt and you fall back into a chair and you sit there forlorn? What happens if you play that sense of vulnerability and you talk about how raw you feel and how lost you are as a result of exposing yourself and not knowing what to do now that the exposure didn't get you anything? Again, when you play those emotions in the scene and the audience sees you going through different stages to try and manage what's happened bit by bit, growing, and finally it gets to the point after you've pleaded and begged and shared your vulnerability and everything with your scene partner, and your scene partner still says no, they're not going to go out with you. When you lose it, the audience moves with you, and they see justification in the rage and the anger, and they really go there with you. Last but not least is that colleague scene, and you're feeling fearful, you're feeling nervous. So what happens if you play the fear first? And then you play the nerves after that. And when you're still not gaining ground with your colleague, the colleague doesn't own up to their half of the problem, that you lose it on them. Again, the audience watches you move through everything and comes to the point when they say, you got to lose it on this person, and your anger becomes justified. So the interesting point that I'm getting at here as an actor is that anger is often a first choice as a reflection of life when anger seems to be the first choice. People blow up quickly, unexpectedly. But in reality, the primary emotions that we hide and mask with anger are the more interesting choices and will take you further and give you more room in a scene. Now that's from an acting perspective. And I've related it already a couple times to the real world, because in the real world, well, you get the kid who throws a tantrum out of nowhere, like, where's my treat? No treat. Ah! You get a teenager who's like, I'm in love with you, please go out with me, and they're rejecting, like, screw you, I don't like you anyway, you stupid blah 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 blah. Same thing with a colleague, right? What do you mean it's not done? That's the first tangible thing that we see in people. So it makes sense that an actor's first choice is to go to that rage. But like real life, the primary emotion, the first thing we see, is not what's being played. Anger is a secondary outcome as a response. So let's talk about that response for a second, real world and acting. Having that confusion, that fear, that loss, any of the previous emotions that I mentioned for those characters, in the real world, hearing that the person you think you're in love with say no to you and being crushed by that, that is overwhelming. It's too much to handle in the moment. And I'd suggest that most people are afraid to deal with that real emotion right there, because not only are you trying to manage it, but trying to analyze it and talk to somebody, that's insane. It's just too much. So as a result of it being too much and the inability to self-reflect in the moment, we lash out, because the lashing out, A, protects us, covers those real emotions, and B, because it's a hurtful tactic, it puts the opposing person that you're dealing with in the same level of hurt, upset, and angst that you are. So misery has been joined with additional misery. Misery loves company. So when we're talking about the real world, anger is a secondary emotion, but it is a primary destroyer of relationships. In the acting world, anger is a secondary choice, or in my eyes should be a secondary choice, because it is a destroyer of scenes, because it leaves you with nowhere to go. So let's move over to the real world for a second. Let's talk about anger in the real world and what it does. We take a look at that kid, we know the outcome when they explode. And I agree, kids don't have this language, so it really rests on the parents to help guide this. But for the sake of discussion, let's assume the parents are guiding the child well. And they see the child's confusion, their loss, their state of unease. And mom and dad start questioning the kid, asking questions, and it finally comes to the point when the kid says, I don't get it. I'm confused. I thought I got a treat for being good, and I was good all day. Where's my treat? The parents hopefully are able to laugh and chuckle at this, because they see the logic of the small child in front of them. They've associated good and treat to a cookie in their mind, maybe a new toy. And it's an assumption, of course. And all of a sudden, the possible rage makes sense. They're not getting what they believed they would get. So this is, of course, the opportunity when the parents say, but you are getting a treat. You have been good. The treat's not what you thought. The treat is going out to your favorite restaurant. We're going to get you your pizza or your spaghetti, whatever it is that this kid loves. And the result of managing the primary emotion first, the confusion in this case, leads to strong communication. Strong communication leads to better understanding. The child gets taught a small lesson subtly in not making assumptions, and the result is a positive one all around, because the kid ends up out getting their favorite food, the parents get a good chuckle out of the understanding better the mind of their child, and all is well. We move forward a little further, we take a look at that second example, real world once again. Person gets rejected, and they're sitting there in absolute hurt, absolute feeling of vulnerability, and they say, wow, that really hurts to hear you say that. And the friend of many years says, I get it. I know what it feels like. Been there myself, because everybody has. And they start talking with each other about that hurt and why the friend can't say yes to the romance. They have the opportunity to make sense of each other for each other. And the result is good communication, and these two friends who never become romantically involved ever in life become even stronger friends for having a better understanding of what makes them friends. And there's no detriment to the emotion, to the relationship, sorry. Last but not least, the colleague situation. You say, where's my report? The colleague says it's not here. We need an extension. And the first colleague says, oh my God, I am so afraid of what's about to happen if I don't have this report. So the colleague, understanding the gravity of the situation all of a sudden, becomes empathetic and starts to work on solutions. You now have two minds working on the same problem, and they come to what seems like a great solution, and they go into the meeting together and present the solution. No faces lost, there's no formal reports, everything looks good in the meeting, and everything is happy, and the strength of that relationship is brought to a higher level because of strong communication. Now, in each case that I've talked about so far, we've pointed out that the primary emotion is the thing that we want to mask with anger. But when we use anger in the real world, we break down communication. It leads to conflict. Conflict leads to the detriment of relationship and the detriment of communication, and everything falls apart. But if we take the moment to go back and deal with the primary emotion and share the reality of our state of being, then that leads to stronger communication, empathy between people, and the building of relationship or strengthening of what was already there, and the actualization of solutions and understanding. See, I have this theory that if the world was more focused on communication, if the world was more focused on self-reflection, then we would be able to overcome great odds and have a better world. Let me exemplify that. Political leader A sitting at a conference table with political leader B at another conference table. Political leader A says, I want this from your country, political leader B. And political leader B says, not a chance. You can't have it. Political leader A is now going through confusion, hurt, nervousness, fear when they go back to their people and say, I didn't get what I promised. And because they don't have the tools to self-reflect, because they don't have the tools to deal with their real emotion, they lash out in anger. They do all sorts of tactics to berate, to defile, to harass political leader B. Political leader B, now feeling hurt and attacked, becomes angry, not addressing that primary emotion of hurt and hurt and feeling attacked. They lash out in anger. You now have two political leaders screaming at each other, and the next thing you know, we have war. If those two political leaders had the ability to self-reflect in the moment, if they had the ability and the strength of character to deal with the primary emotion first, conflict would be resolved, or avoided more appropriately. Communication would happen as to why political leader B could not give what political leader A wants. Maybe some compromises could happen, and we have the strengthening of relationship through communication and fair outcomes for all. No war. So I come back to this theory that if we have the ability to self-reflect and manage our primary emotion, then we can get through life with greater outcome. Let's do a little bit of sum up, a little bit of wrap up, because I've said a lot. What I've said in a nutshell is that anger is always a secondary emotion, but in the real world it is a primary destroyer of relationships. Anger, from the acting perspective, is always a secondary emotion in terms of strong choices for scene, and it's a secondary step, but it is the primary destroyer of a good scene because you lose your audience very quickly. So anger is always secondary, but its repercussion is primary destruction in all cases. And my theory is that if we dealt with the primary, we wouldn't have the destruction. Which of course leads me to the challenge for all of you out there. I think everybody's been told once or twice or heard somebody say it, you start to lose your temper, count to 10 before you say anything else. And my challenge for you this week is that next time you get angry, count to 10 before you say anything. See if you can simmer down just enough that you can reflect And once you've reflected, identify the primary emotion that you're actually feeling. What is it that you're using anger to cover? And having figured out what you're covering, I challenge you to talk about that with the person you're about to lash out at and see what happens to the strength of the relationship as a result. Those are your thoughts from the green room. I am your host, Geoff Mays, and I will see you in a few weeks.